across our state. And I'm joined with Erika Ortiz, a field organizer from the ACLU, and Jacqueline Blickley, who's a staff attorney at the ACLU as well as our friend Rachel Moon, who also works with the ACLU. We're going to talk tonight about two important Supreme Court decisions that have direct and immediate implications on the health and safety of our community. This would be the U.S. versus Skrmetti and Orr versus Trump. We're going to talk about what these cases mean and how they affect people broadly. We'll talk about what this means for our country and our community here in Connecticut. And we'll also go through some things that you can do both right now and over the long term. And frankly, this has been a difficult year for our community, right? The last few weeks in particular have hit all of us pretty hard. As we move through these challenging times together, it can be frustrating to not know what information is accurate, how it pertains to you or your family, and also what might come next. We don't have all the answers, but we can take a moment here now to talk through some of the most recent issues that have come up with some of our incredible colleagues and experts, and just remind each other that we're not alone. To be clear, this is not a place where we'll be giving specific legal advice. I should also point out that this is being recorded. It's going to be posted on YouTube so that you can share it with folks who might want to see it after, or you can watch it again even if you want. Now, for 40 years, I have not been a lawyer. So I will turn it over to Jacqueline and Attica to really go through, to take us through these two cases and what they mean, and to start talking through some questions. And so go ahead, Attica. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt, for introducing us and setting the space. Again, my name is Erika Ortiz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Fairfield organizer for ACLU of Connecticut. Before we get started, there is a Q&A feature. So as we're having this conversation, please feel free to submit your questions there as they arise, and we'll try our best to answer them. And at any point, if we don't answer your questions, you can email info@acluct.org for very specific inquiries and questions, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So with that being said, I'm gonna start this thing off. And I want to thank you, Jacqueline, so much for being here today with all of us. And I just wanted to kind of start this off with, can you break down some of the facts of the cases in Orr versus Trump for us first?
Sure. Thank you. Happy to be here. Again, my name is Jacqueline. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of Connecticut. So the case Orr versus Trump arose out of an executive order signed on the first day of this second Trump administration, seeking to mandate discrimination against transgender people across the federal government and federal programs. So this included a directive that the Departments of State and Homeland Security require that government-issued identification documents, so things like passports, visas, global entry cards, reflect a person's sex, quote, at conception. So the immediate impact of this directive was that the State Department began holding on to some folks' passports and other documents in processing, returning other people's applications as rejected, or issuing new passports marked with the person's sex assigned at birth. So the ACLU National Office, along with our colleagues in Massachusetts, filed a lawsuit in the District of Massachusetts on behalf of 7 transgender and non-binary people, arguing that this policy is arbitrary and capricious, violates a person's right to travel, their right to privacy under the Due Process Clause, violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, and violates a plaintiff's First Amendment rights.
Thank you so much for that, and just really wanted to overemphasize that it is completely arbitrary and is violating the rights of people in our country and our state. And so with that being said, just last month in June, it is to my understanding that the federal court issued a court order in this case. And so what does that court order entail specifically?
Yeah, great question. So to jump back quickly to April, the court issued what is called a preliminary injunction finding that the executive order and the State Department policy was likely unconstitutional and violated the law. So this is a win, temporarily blocking the new policy and allowing 6 of the named plaintiffs to obtain passports with sex designations consistent with their gender identity while the lawsuit proceeds. So after that relief was granted, the ACLU sought to have the relief apply to a class of plaintiffs beyond the 7 people named in the litigation by moving for class certification. So on June 17th, the U.S. District Court in Massachusetts granted that motion and expanded the lawsuit to cover the interests of members of the class. I can go through the classes in more detail, but the definition broadly covers people whose gender identity differs from their sex assigned at birth. In addition to defining the class, the court ordered that the State Department allow people with a gender identity different from their sex assigned at birth to self-select their sex designation on their passport while the case proceeds. So being part of this class means that your interests are covered by the litigation without the need for you to be directly involved as a plaintiff.
Thanks so much. I think also in a time where there's so much chaos happening, I really want to uplift that win, which is really, really incredible. And so also, could you break down how that impacts folks specifically here in Connecticut?
Sure, happy to. So that's the most important and, in my opinion, the most exciting part of what we're talking about today. So this means that folks in Connecticut who qualify as class members can apply for their passports in a few instances, which we can walk through. I think we're going to throw up a slide. So this has a lot of words on it, but I'll try to distill it down a little bit. So there's 2 classes here, which has implications for how the case is litigated and things like that. But the kind of broad strokes here is that the relief applies to folks whose sex designation on their passport does not align with their gender identity. So that could be any number of things, including a person who was assigned male at birth, has an M on their current passport, but needs that change to be an F on their passport. And so that can be any change in your designation on your passport from what is there currently to be aligned with your gender identity. The distinction that is here matters. The MF designation class versus X designation class matters for how folks who apply for a new passport will fill out an attestation form, which has to be submitted with the application. I'll talk more about that. And there's a helpful FAQ that walks through that, but we'll come back to that in a second. So people who, based on these definitions, fall into one of these 2 classes can apply for a passport with a sex marker consistent with their gender identity if a few things. You don't have a current valid passport at all. You need to renew your passport because it expires within 1 year. You need to change your passport to correct your sex designation or name, which I think is probably the category that most people will fall under, or in the case that your passport was lost, stolen, or damaged. In those cases, the ACLU is encouraging people to file passport applications as soon as you can. Included in that application needs to be an attestation form which indicates that you are part of the class of the lawsuit. So the form is available at a link that I think we will be putting up. Yes, on the left is the attestation form. On the right is an incredibly helpful FAQ section that is being consistently updated, which also goes into detail for how to go about filling that out in terms of which boxes you need to check, how to fill out the passport application itself and include the attestation form. So I would encourage folks before they submit their application to go through that FAQ and read it really closely. That way there's no other issues with their application. So I think that's where OR is at, which is an exciting place.
Thank you so much. I really want to uplift, fill out that form, all the FAQs, and all the resources available. And thank you for explaining that in such detail. I think it's extremely helpful and hopefully will help so many other people with those distinctions as well. And so kind of with that, I would like to shift a little gears and talk about US versus Skrmetti. And so Jacqueline, could you tell us a little bit more about this case, what it is, etc.?
Sure. So for background, since 2021, 25 states have passed laws banning hormone therapy for transgender youth with gender dysphoria. This is a staggering number. That's half of the United States. One such ban was passed in Tennessee. The ACLU and its partners brought a lawsuit challenging the provisions of the Tennessee law, which sought to bar transgender youth from accessing hormone therapies, such as hormone replacement therapy and puberty blockers. So this case wound its way through the district court in Tennessee, up to the Sixth Circuit, and in December of 2024 to the Supreme Court. Along the way, the United States under the Biden administration joined the lawsuit to similarly challenge the Tennessee law. But kind of the broad strokes of the legal argument is the ACLU argued that this law violates the Equal Protection Clause by discriminating on the basis of sex and transgender status.
Ooh, thank you so much. I want to just like uplift that that's so much information and also very heavy information. And so for those who may be watching that are personally impacted, rather adjacently or as an individual, just this is an important time to really lean on community and those resources around you and really lean into community care and to also honor and uplift that ACLU is in these courtrooms fighting for us and our rights and our civil liberties. And many other local organizations that are fighting at the local level to maintain, to be a resource and a beacon of hope. And so I just wanted to name that. And so kind of with that being said, the Supreme Court did rule on this case last month as well. Could you perhaps walk us through that decision, Jacqueline?
Sure. So this is the difficult part. So in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court allowed Tennessee's law banning gender-affirming medical care for trans youth to remain in effect. So the court found that Tennessee's ban does not discriminate based on sex or transgender status. Instead, the court found that the law merely makes age and medical distinctions. So the legal effect of this is that the state only needed to show that they had a rational basis for the law, instead of needing to clear that much higher bar of heightened scrutiny applied to laws containing sex-based classifications. The Supreme Court ultimately found that Tennessee met the rational basis requirement. So this decision, kind of as you indicated, is a devastating setback and a painful decision that will impact transgender youth across the country. Over 100,000 transgender people under the age of 18 now live in a state with a law banning their access to healthcare. But I want to emphasize that trans people, trans young people, and their families are not alone in this fight. As you said, we'll continue to fight in courtrooms and communities to ensure all people, especially trans people, have the freedom to shape their own futures. Medical care for transgender youth is endorsed as essential treatment for those who need it by every medical, pediatric, and psychological association in the US. And courts are just one of the many tools we have to fight back against the targeted attacks we are seeing against trans people's safety, dignity, and humanity.
Thank you for centering that and for explaining. And for those who are also watching, could you explain maybe a little more how this particularly will impact us here in Connecticut?
Sure. So while this decision has significant impacts across the country, there are a few things that it doesn't address. So the first thing is healthcare for adults. The Tennessee law at issue only addresses the provision of care for minors. The second thing is that it does not ban care in states like Connecticut, who do not have similar laws in place, like the law in Tennessee. Connecticut is not one of those 25 states I referenced earlier who have passed laws banning hormone therapy for transgender youth with gender dysphoria. This doesn't mean, however, that we are not without work to do in our state. The legislature is currently out of session, but we need to make sure our legislators know that we care about the trans youth in our state and their ability to continue to seek out life-saving healthcare. It's also critical that our state strengthen its shield laws to protect young people who may come to Connecticut to seek care. And we'll talk a little bit more later about concrete ways to do that.
Thank you so much for explaining that. And yeah, just thank you especially for grounding us with this really specific information, especially how what that means and what it doesn't mean, and how these like decisions impact larger communities. And so I just want to acknowledge that and honor that. And again, to affirm that this is really hard information to take in, especially as we're impacted and by this in many intersectional ways. And so Just want to uplift that ACLU is a resource, and again, with specific inquiries, questions, you can definitely email us at info at ACLU-CT.org. Myself and many others on our team will respond back and really just tap into your community resources as well. And so I do want to shift a little bit into kind of like a Q&A because we did receive some questions. Um, and so one of the questions that we have in the chat is, how can we as allies speak up effectively to support trans youth and their families? I can take a quick stab, and then if folks want to jump for sure. I definitely think right in the state of Connecticut, in particular, there's resources like the New Haven Pride Center and other places that have community closets, that have food pantries and things like that. And while folks are affected by different things due to legislation and other components, though, like looking into specific community resources, sometimes Googling like your local nonprofits are really helpful. Also, a quick search like via Instagram to see like what flyers are around are really good and helpful way to kind of tap into that. And there's lots of mutual aid groups throughout the state of Connecticut that are doing really incredible work, and like honoring folks like Milford Pride and other spaces throughout the state. And so those are some resources and some ideas. But if anyone else has any ideas or things they'd like to add, I'll pass it to them.
Thanks, Eddic. I'm happy to add something too. I've been thinking about this a lot that, it's really important in this moment to, think about what we can do right now. And I think one of the most important elements of resisting what is happening to our community is to stay as informed as possible. And I don't mean to sound trivial about this, but information is coming at us from every direction. And when a law passes in Washington, when the Supreme Court makes a decision, or when something happens in Connecticut, we really have to step back to think about the way that we receive and find information and how it affects us and our families. And I think as allies or as queer folks, I've been really thinking about like the early days of the COVID epidemic, and when we formed pods, if you remember that, where uh, we formed tight-knit circles of people we trusted that enough to see them in person, right? On occasion. And well, we need to form information pods like that. And I think when something happens, we need to, really think about where we're getting information and if it's accurate and who can we trust in our immediate social network to verify that information. There's so much misinformation that comes from social media and from all kinds of different sources. And it's groups like the ACLU that I think really are an example, but there are others that provide detailed information on a regular basis about what you need to know. And, the last thing I'll say is, we will resist this in many different ways. We will show up, we will lobby, we will vote, we will campaign and protest, but we also have to read our way out of this. And so really read as much as you can. And again, I don't mean that may sound trivial, but we we really need to read as much as we can and not rely on social media and things like that, where and think about where we get our information. So that's all I'll say is we have to read our way out of this and think about close circles of trust and where we get our information.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I've never thought about a like an information pod before. The one thing I wanted to add to this portion of the discussion today, we touched on passports, we touched on healthcare. The other area in which we're seeing kind of attacks on our kids here in Connecticut is in schools. And I know that the issue of, participation in school sports has come up in some of our school districts. And so I would also encourage people to attend school board meetings and local meetings that are happening in their own communities to show up for our kids in those spaces too. And that's a place where you can be incredibly active on the ground level of making sure that our school districts protect our kids and, encourage the diversity among the materials they're reading and the curriculum they have access to, and that all students feel safe and able to participate in their school communities. That's one more little plug.
Thank you both. Those are such really important points. And I think, going back to community resources, especially like young people in education and in schools, excuse me, connecting them to outside resources where they see their identities reflected back to them. I also think in terms of allyship and supporting those who are especially marginalized and being harmed. I think listening to those who are being impacted by this, real world stories are also information and proof as to what is happening. And so a good way to also begin around what can I do is really being centered and forward for the source of what's happening and what do you need and where can I show up in a way that I'm able to, I think is also an important factor as well. And so, yeah, thank you both for engaging. We have two more questions, and one of the other questions we have is, are these cases done here? Here, I believe, meaning the state of Connecticut. And what's the best way to stay updated on legal developments in these cases?
Sure. So these two cases are not Connecticut cases, and we don't currently have any Connecticut cases active in this space. But I will tell you, our national colleagues are all over it with the litigation, along with some of our other fantastic affiliate partners. One of the best ways that you can stay updated, the ACLU's website is frequently updating their case pages, including that FAQ page I sent or I indicated to in the question and answer section. The other places to follow all of the social media accounts for the national office, follow our social media accounts. I know we tend to bump litigation updates. So those are two of the, I think, main sources to kind of follow up on our litigation. I don't know, Erica, if you have other thoughts on places people can stay up to date, or Matt, if you have any thoughts.
That was good. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we're going to show a link to Equality Connecticut's email listserv. We try to put out information as much as we can. There are numerous organizations, such as the Williams Institute and the Movement Advancement Project, that I think an act of resistance now is like to take time to read those briefings and to stay as informed as we can. And so I would say you all at the ACLU put out a tremendous volume and some really wonderful high quality information that affects us all on a daily basis. And I try to read every word of it, and in terms of how it affects me and the people I love. And so I would say, if nothing else, the ACLU Connecticut's a really good place to start. Every word you put out has value and significance for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. And so we have two more, or a few more, excuse me. So this question is, to reiterate, if I already received a passport where they changed my gender marker, do I have to pay for a passport again to change it back?
That's a great question. So this is also very helpfully covered in that FAQ page. So there is a form called a DS5504 form, which is a form that allows you to correct data, and that would include your sex designation on your passport. So in the case that you received a sex designation on your passport other than the one you requested, you may be able to utilize this form. So I would definitely say to access the FAQs, which we can throw the QR code back up before we part ways. And then there's also information about this on the State Department's website that will go into a little more detail. If you are in the situation where you have already applied and paid, you may be able to use that form to correct instead of submitting an entirely new application. But if you run into any other issues or have more specific questions, our legal intake email is a great place to get an answer from an attorney. So that email address is intake@acluct.org. And it's also linked on our website where we can answer more specific legal questions.
Thank you so much. Another question we have is, you've talked about community organizations and getting involved with communities. With my communities, I will definitely be looking into places like the New Haven Pride Center. How can we get involved with you all as well? And so again, I think especially if there's like particular inquiries or questions, you can always email us at info@acluct.org. Especially other attributes to that is like during legislative session, when we're in the Capitol building, when we're at community events, you can go on our website and there's many ways to kind of engage what's happening, action teams and things to kind of like tap into. And we're always working with other community partners. So there's also always an extension to other community partners on the ground that you can have access to, especially if we're there or that, we have access to, as I mentioned. So definitely reach out to us, and whichever way that makes sense that we can plug in and kind of answer questions or support or kind of co-create together. We would love to do that. Um, I think that is it for all of our questions. And I'm just gonna double check. Okay. Yeah, I think those are all our questions. So I think if we want, as that kind of concludes a little bit of our discussion. Again, to reiterate, please, if also before this, if we want to throw up the QR code again, perhaps. Um, but yes, please email us at info@acluct.org for any questions. Again, if we didn't get to yours or you thought of it later on and you want to really engage with us, please do so. We really, really want to connect with everyone. And so, yes, thank you for joining. We really, again, thank you for engaging and being a part of this conversation. Thank you, Jacqueline and Matt, for kind of really setting the container and creating the opportunity for folks to hear a little bit about like what's happening, what things mean, what they don't, and how it's impacting us in particular in the state of Connecticut. And so, yes, you can follow us at Instagram, ACLU-CT, or our national ACLU, and please connect with Matt and Equality Connecticut. And we want to thank you so much for joining us today. Bye, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, that was great. Thanks so much.
Yay.
Great. Bye, all.
Well done. Thank you.